Hey everyone, it's me, DB Spitzer. I'm just here, hoping you're all doing well, staying safe, keeping your mouths covered, trying to keep the curve down instead of like straight in the other axis. You know, it's a good thing to keep you inside and keep you occupied. BunnySlippers.com. Oh my goodness, why would you want to go outside? There's so many different animals, novelty slippers that you can wear. I'm not making light of everything that's going on outside, but damn it, look at those slippers. They are nice. And, BunnySlippers.com. They're damn nice. No, check out their Highland cow slippers. They're shaggy bowls that look really cool. And I have to say they're really nice and warm. And they've got so many other things. They've got, like, different things that you can put on your feet of things that you like. BunnySlippers.com and FoundItemClothing.com, too. Great company. Works in conjunction with BunnySlippers.com to give you some of the best 80s outfits that you can find on the internet. Just like Chris Knight from Real Genius, Val Kilmer's character. They've got the Revenge of the Nerd shirts that I love. Am I wearing one right now? No, I'm actually wearing an official PGttCM shirt that you can find at the show shop. At the show shop, the show store. It's a direct link to our t-shirts that you can buy to help support the show. Also, t-shirts for Articulate Warbling, new one coming up soon, and new episode coming up soon, new t-shirt coming up soon, new t-shirts for new episodes for Dave's Underground Goat Shenanigans, and new t-shirts already up. I'm always coming up with new t-shirts idea, and thank you so much for supporting the show by buying my t-shirts and FoundItemClothing.com's t-shirts and BunnySlippers.com. And you know what? We're probably going to have some new sponsors in August as the show grows and grows. Thank you all, new listeners. We kick past the 2,000 mark in followers officially on Podbean. We're still somewhere in the 30K daily listeners. Thank you so much for sharing and telling people about us. If you want to follow us, we are People's Cthulhu Podcast, Black Clock Audio Tales, everywhere else. Kind of poking around on Twitter here and there. Mostly on Instagram. Doing Facebook. Always do Facebook, because it's on my phone. And yeah. So help the show. Check out the other shows I produce. And here's some Algernon Blackwood.
An Egyptian hornet. The word has an angry, malignant sound that brings the idea of attack vividly into the mind. There is a vicious sting about it somewhere. Even a foreigner, ignorant of the meaning, must feel it. A hornet is wicked. It darts and stabs. It pierces, aiming without provocation for the face and eyes. The name suggests a metallic droning of evil wings, fierce flight, and poisonous assault. Though black and yellow, it sounds scarlet. There is blood in it, a striped tiger of the air in concentrated form. There is no escape if it attacks. In Egypt, an ordinary bee is the size of an English hornet, but the Egyptian hornet is enormous. It is truly monstrous, an ominous, dying terror. It shares that universal quality of the land of the Sphinx and pyramids, great size. It is a formidable insect, worse than scorpion or tarantula. The Reverend James Milligan, meeting one for the first time, realized the meaning of another word as well, a word he used prolifically in his eloquent sermons: devil. One morning in April, when the heat began to bring the insects out, he rose as usual betimes and went across the wide stone corridor to his bath. The desert already glared in through the open windows. The heat would be afflicting later in the day, but at this early hour the cool north wind blew pleasantly down the hotel passages. It was Sunday, and at 8:30 he would appear to conduct the morning service for the English visitors. The floor of the passageway was cold beneath his feet in their thin native slippers of bright yellow. He was neither young nor old. His salary was comfortable. He had a competency of his own, without wife or children to absorb it. The dry climate had been recommended to him, and the big hotel took him in for next to nothing. And he was thoroughly pleased with himself, for he was a sleek, vain, pompous, well-advertised personality, but mean as a rat. No worries of any kind were in his mind, as, carrying sponge and towel, scented soap and a bottle of Scrubb's ammonia, he travelled amiably across the deserted, shining corridor to the bathroom. And nothing went wrong with the Reverend James Milligan until he opened the door, and his eye fell upon a dark, suspicious-looking object clinging to the window-pane in front of him. And even then, at first, he felt no anxiety or alarm, but merely a natural curiosity to know exactly what it was, this little clot of an odd-shaped, elongated thing that stuck there on the wooden framework 6 feet before his aquiline nose. He went straight up to it to see, then stopped dead. His heart gave a distinct, unclerical leap. His lips formed themselves into unregenerate shape. He gasped, "Good God, what is it?" For something unholy, something wicked as a secret sin, stuck there before his eyes in the patch of blazing sunshine. He caught his breath. For a moment he was unable to move, as though the sight half fascinated him. Then, cautiously and very slowly, stealthily in fact, he withdrew towards the door he had just entered. Fearful of making the smallest sound, he retraced his steps on tiptoe. His yellow slippers shuffled, his dry sponge fell and bounded till it settled, rolling close beneath the horribly attractive object facing him. From the safety of the open door, with ample space for retreat behind him, he paused and stared. His entire being focused itself in his eyes. It was a hornet that he saw. It hung there, motionless and threatening, between him and the bathroom door, and at first he merely exclaimed, below his breath, "Good Lord, it's an Egyptian hornet!" Being a man with a reputation for decided action, however, he soon recovered himself. He was well schooled in self-control. When people left his church at the beginning of the sermon, no muscle of his face betrayed the wounded vanity and annoyance that burned deep in his heart. But a hornet sitting directly in his path was a very different matter. He realized in a flash that he was poorly clothed, in a word, that he was practically half naked. From a distance he examined this intrusion of the devil. It was calm and very still. It was wonderfully made, both before and behind. Its wings were folded upon its terrible body. Long, sinuous things, pointed like temptation, barbed as well, stuck out of it. There was poison, and yet grace in its exquisite presentment. Its shiny black was beautiful, and the yellow stripes upon its sleek, curved abdomen were like the gleaming ornaments upon some feminine body of the seductive world he preached against. Almost he saw an abandoned dancer on the stage. And then, swiftly in his impressionable soul, the simile changed, and he saw instead more blunt and aggressive forms of destruction. The well-filled body, tapering to a horrid point, reminded him of those perfect engines of death that reduce hundreds to annihilation unawares, torpedoes, shells, projectiles, crammed with secret, desolating powers. Its wings, its awful quiet head, its delicate slim waist, its stripes of brilliant saffron, all these seemed the concentrated prototype of abominations made cleverly by the brain of man, and beautifully painted to disguise their invisible freight of cruel death. "Bah!" he exclaimed, ashamed of his prolific imagination. "It's only a hornet, after all, an insect." And he contrived a hurried, careful plan. He aimed a towel at it, rolled up into a ball, but did not throw it. He might miss. He remembered that his ankles were unprotected. Instead, he paused again, examining the black and yellow object in safe retirement near the door, as one day he hoped to watch the world in leisurely retirement in the country. It did not move. It was fixed and terrible. It made no sound. Its wings were folded. Not even the black antennae, blunt at the tips like clubs, showed the least stir or tremble. It breathed, however. He watched the rise and fall of the evil body. It breathed air in and out as he himself did. The creature, he realized, had lungs and heart and organs. It had a brain. Its mind was active all this time. It knew it was being watched. It merely waited. Any second, with a whiz of fury, and with perfect accuracy of aim, it might dart at him and strike. If he threw the towel and missed, it certainly would. There were other occupants of the corridor, however, and a sound of steps approaching gave him the decision to act. He would lose his bath if he hesitated much longer. He felt ashamed of his timidity, though pusillanimity was the word thought selected owing to the pulpit vocabulary it was his habit to prefer. He went with extreme caution towards the bathroom door, passing the point of danger so close that his skin turned hot and cold. With one foot gingerly extended, he recovered his sponge. The hornet did not move a muscle. But it had seen him pass. It merely waited. All dangerous insects had that trick. It knew quite well he was inside. It knew quite well he must come out a few minutes later. It also knew quite well that he was naked. Once inside the little room, he closed the door with exceeding gentleness, lest the vibration might stir the fearful insect to attack. The bath was already filled, and he plunged to his neck with a feeling of comparative security. A window into the outside passage he also closed, so that nothing could possibly come in. And steam soon charged the air and left its blurred deposit on the glass. For 10 minutes he could enjoy himself and pretend that he was safe. For 10 minutes he did so. He behaved carelessly, as though nothing mattered, and as though all the courage in the world were his. He splashed and soaped and sponged, making a lot of reckless noise. He got out and dried himself. Slowly the steam subsided, the air grew clearer, he put on dressing-gown and slippers, and it was time to go out. Unable to devise any further reason for delay, he opened the door softly half an inch, peeped out, and instantly closed it again with a resounding bang. He had heard a drone of wings. The insect had left its perch and now buzzed upon the floor directly in his path. The air seemed full of stings. He felt stabs all over him. His unprotected portions winced with the expectancy of pain. The beast knew he was coming out and was waiting for him. In that brief instant he had felt its sting all over him, on his unprotected ankles, on his back, his neck, his cheeks, in his eyes, and on the bald clearing that adorned his Anglican head. Through the closed door he heard the ominous, dull murmur of his striped adversary as it beat its angry wings. Its oiled and wicked sting shot in and out with fury. Its deft legs worked. He saw its tiny waist already writhing with the lust of battle. Ah! That tiny waist! A moment's steady nerve and he could have severed that cunning body from the directing brain with one swift, well-directed thrust. But his nerve had utterly deserted him. Human motives, even in the professedly holy, are an involved affair at any time. Just now, in the Reverend James Milligan, they were quite inextricably mixed. He claims this explanation, at any rate, in excuse of his abominable subsequent behaviour. For exactly at this moment, when he had decided to admit cowardice by ringing for the Arab servant, a step was audible in the corridor outside, and courage came with it into his disreputable heart. It was the step of the man he cordially disapproved of, using the pulpit version of hated and despised. He had overstayed his time, and the bath was in demand by Mr. Mullins. Mr. Mullins invariably followed him at 7:30. It was now 7:45, and Mr. Mullins was a wretched drinking man, a sot. In a flash the plan was conceived and put into execution. The temptation, of course, was of the devil. Mr. Milligan hid the motive from himself, pretending he hardly recognized it. The plan was what men call a dirty trick. It was also irresistibly seductive. He opened the door, stepped boldly, nose in the air, right over the hideous insect on the floor, and fairly pranced into the outer passage. The brief transit brought 100 horrible sensations: that the hornet would rise and sting his leg, that it would cling to his dressing gown and stab his spine, that he would step upon it and die like Achilles of a heel exposed. But with these and conquering them was one other stronger emotion that robbed the lesser terrors of their potency, that Mr. Mullins would run precisely the same risks 5 seconds later, unprepared. He heard the gloating insect buzz and scratch the oilcloth. But it was behind him. He was safe. "Good morning to you, Mr. Mullins," he observed with a gracious smile. "I trust I have not kept you waiting." "Mornin'," grunted Mullins sourly in reply, as he passed him with a distinctly hostile and contemptuous air. For Mullins, though depraved, was perhaps an honest man, abhorring parsons and making no secret of his opinions, whence the bitter feeling. All men except those very big ones who are supermen have something astonishingly despicable in them. The despicable thing in Milligan came uppermost now. He fairly chuckled. He met the snub with a calm, forgiving smile, and continued his shambling gait with what dignity he could towards his bedroom opposite. Then he turned his head to see. His enemy would meet an infuriated hornet, an Egyptian hornet, and might not notice it. He might step on it. He might not. But he was bound to disturb it and rouse it to attack. The chances were enormously on the clerical side, and its sting meant death. "May God forgive me," ran subconsciously through his mind, and side by side with the repentant prayer ran also a recognition of the tempter's eternal skill. "I hope the devil it will sting him." It happened very quickly. The Reverend James Milligan lingered a moment by his door to watch. He saw Mullins, the disgusting Mullins, step blithely into the bathroom passage. He saw him pause, shrink back, and raise his arm to protect his face. He heard him swear out loud, "What's the damn thing doing here? Have I really got him again?" And then he heard him laugh, a hearty, guffawing laugh of genuine relief. "It's real!" The moment of revulsion was overwhelming. It filled the churchly heart with anguish and bitter disappointment. For a space he hated the whole race of men. For the instant Mr. Mullins realized that the insect was not a fiery illusion of his disordered nerves, he went forward without the smallest hesitation. With his towel he knocked down the flying terror. Then he stooped. He gathered up the venomous thing his well-aimed blow had stricken so easily to the floor. He advanced with it, held at arm's length, to the window. He tossed it out carelessly. The Egyptian hornet flew away uninjured, and Mr. Mullins, the Mr. Mullins who drank, gave nothing to the church, attended no services, hated parsons, and proclaimed the fact with enthusiasm, this same detestable Mr. Mullins went to his unearned bath without a scratch. But first he saw his enemy standing in the doorway across the passage, watching him, and understood. That was the awful part of it. Mullins would make a story of it, and the story would go the round of the hotel. The Reverend James Milligan, however, proved that his reputation for self-control was not undeserved. He conducted morning service half an hour later with an expression of peace upon his handsome face. He conquered all outward sign of inward spiritual vexation. The wicked, he consoled himself, ever flourish like green bay trees. It was notorious that the righteous never have any luck at all. That was bad enough. But what was worse, and the Reverend James Milligan remembered for very long, was the superior ease with which Mullins had relegated both himself and Hornet to the same level of comparative insignificance. Mullins ignored them both, which proved that he felt himself superior. Infinitely worse than the sting of any hornet in the world, He really was superior. End of story 9. By water. The night before young Larson left to take up his new appointment in Egypt, he went to the clairvoyant. He neither believed nor disbelieved. He felt no interest, for he already knew his past and did not wish to know his future. "Just to please me, Jim," the girl pleaded. "The woman is wonderful. Before I had been 5 minutes with her, she told me your initials, so there must be something in it." "She read your thought," he smiled indulgently. "Even I can do that." But the girl was in earnest. He yielded, and that night, at his farewell dinner, he came to give his report of the interview. The result was meagre and unconvincing. Money was coming to him, he was soon to make a voyage, and he would never marry. "So you see how silly it all is," he laughed, for they were to be married when his first promotion came. He gave the details, however, making a little story of it in the way he knew she loved. "But was that all, Jim?" the girl asked it, looking rather hard into his face. "Aren't you hiding something from me?" He hesitated a moment, then burst out laughing at her clever discernment. "There was a little more," he confessed, "but you take it all so seriously, He had to tell it then, of course. The woman had told him a lot of gibberish about friendly and unfriendly elements. She said, "Water was unfriendly to me. I was to be careful of water, or else I should come to harm by it. Fresh water only," he hastened to add, seeing that the idea of shipwreck was in her mind. "Drowning?" the girl asked quickly. "Yes," he admitted with reluctance, but still laughing. "She did say drowning, though drowning in no ordinary way." The girl's face showed uneasiness a moment. "What does that mean, drowning in no ordinary way?" she asked, a catch in her breath. But that he could not tell her, because he did not know himself. He gave, therefore, the exact words: "You will drown, but will not know you drown." It was unwise of him. He wished afterwards he had invented a happier report, or had kept this detail back. "I'm safe in Egypt anyhow," he laughed. "I shall be a clever man if I can find enough water in the desert to do me harm." And all the way from Trieste to Alexandria he remembered the promise she had extracted, that he would never once go on the Nile unless duty made it imperative for him to do so. He kept that promise, like the literal, faithful soul he was. His love was equal to the somewhat quixotic sacrifice it occasionally involved. Fresh water in Egypt there was practically none other, and in any case the natrum works where his duty lay had their headquarters some distance out into the desert. The river, with its banks of welcome, refreshing verdure, was not even visible. Months passed quickly, and the time for leave came within measurable distance. In the long interval, luck had played the cards kindly for him. Vacancies had occurred, early promotion seemed likely, and his letters were full of plans to bring her out to share a little house of their own. His health, however, had not improved. The dryness did not suit him. Even in this short period his blood had thinned, his nervous system deteriorated, and, contrary to the doctor's prophecy, the waterless air had told upon his sleep. A damp climate liked him best, and once the sun had touched him with its fiery finger. His letters made no mention of this. He described the life to her, the work, the sport, the pleasant people, and his chances of increased pay and early marriage. And a week before he sailed, he rode out upon a final act of duty to inspect the latest diggings his company were making. His course lay some 20 miles into the desert behind El Chobak and towards the limestone hills of Gubi el Hadi, and he went alone, carrying lunch and tea, for it was the weekly holiday of Friday, and the men were not at work. The accident was ordinary enough. On his way back in the heat of early afternoon, his pony stumbled against a boulder on the treacherous desert film, threw him heavily, broke the girth, bolted before he could seize the reins again, and left him stranded some 10 or 12 miles from home. There was a pain in his knee that made walking difficult, a buzzing in his head that troubled sight and made the landscape swim, while, worse than either, his provisions, fastened to the saddle, had vanished with the frightened pony into those blazing leagues of sand. He was alone in the desert, beneath the pitiless afternoon sun, 12 miles of utterly exhausting country between him and safety. Under normal conditions he would have covered the distance in 4 hours, reaching home by dark, but his knee pained him so that a mile an hour proved the best he could possibly do. He reflected a few minutes. The wisest course was to sit down and wait till the pony told its obvious story to the stable, and help should come. And this was what he did, for the scorching heat and glare were dangerous. They were terrible. He was shaken and bewildered by his fall, hungry and weak into the bargain, and an hour's painful scrambling over the baked and burning little gorges must have speedily caused complete prostration. He sat down and rubbed his aching knee. It was quite a little adventure. Yet, though he knew the desert might not be lightly trifled with, he felt at the moment nothing more than this, and the amusing description of it he would give in his letter, or intoxicating thought, by word of mouth. In the heat of the sun he began to feel drowsy. A soft torpor crept over him. He dozed. He fell asleep. It was a long, dreamless sleep, for when he woke at length the sun had just gone down, the dusk lay awfully upon the enormous desert, and the air was chilly. The cold had waked him. Quickly, as though on purpose, the red glow faded from the sky. The first stars shone. It was dark. The heavens were deep violet. He looked round and realized that his sense of direction had gone entirely. Great hunger was in him. The cold already was bitter as the wind rose, but the pain in his knee having eased, he got up and walked a little, and in a moment lost sight of the spot where he had been lying. The shadowy desert swallowed it. Ah, he realized, this is not an English field or moor. I'm in the desert. The safe thing to do was to remain exactly where he was. Only thus could the rescuers find him. Once he wandered, he was done for. It was strange the search party had not yet arrived. To keep warm, however, he was compelled to move, so he made a little pile of stones to mark the place, and walked round and round it in a circle of some dozen yards diameter. He limped badly, and the hunger gnawed dreadfully, but after all, the adventure was not so terrible. The amusing side of it kept uppermost still. Though fragile in body, his spirit was not unduly timid or imaginative. He could last out the night, or if the worst came to the worst, the next day as well. But when he watched the little group of stones, he saw that there were dozens of them, scores, hundreds, thousands of these little groups of stones. The desert's face, of course, is thickly strewn with them. The original one was lost in the first 5 minutes. So he sat down again. But the biting cold and the wind that licked his very skin beneath the light clothing soon forced him up again. It was ominous, and the night huge and shelterless. The shaft of green zodiacal light that hung so strangely in the western sky for hours had faded away. The stars were out in their bright thousands. No guide was anywhere. The wind moaned and puffed among the sandy mounds. The vast sheet of desert stretched appallingly upon the world. He heard the jackals cry. And with the jackal's cry came suddenly the unwelcome realization that no play was in this adventure any more, but that a bleak reality stared at him through the surrounding darkness. He faced it at bay. He was genuinely lost. Thought blocked in him. "I must be calm and think," he said aloud. His voice woke no echo. It was small and dead. Something gigantic ate it instantly. He got up and walked again. Why did no one come? Hours had passed. The pony had long ago found its stable, or had it run madly in another direction altogether? He worked out possibilities, tightening his belt. The cold was searching. He never had been, never could be, warm again. The hot sunshine of a few hours ago seemed the merest dream. Unfamiliar with hardship, he knew not what to do, but he took his coat and shirt off, vigorously rubbing his skin where the dried perspiration of the afternoon still caused clammy shivers, swung his arms furiously like a London cabman, and quickly dressed again. Though the wind upon his bare back was fearful, he felt warmer, a little. He lay down exhausted, sheltered by an overhanging limestone crag, and took snatches of fitful dog-sleep, while the wind drove overhead and the dry sand pricked his skin. One face continually was near him, one pair of tender eyes, two dear hands smoothed him. He smelt the perfume of light brown hair. It was all natural enough. His whole thought, in his misery, ran to her in England, England where there were soft, fresh grass, big sheltering trees, hemlock and honeysuckle in the hedges, while the hard black desert guarded him, and consciousness dipped away at little intervals under this dry and pitiless Egyptian sky. It was perhaps 5 in the morning when a voice spoke, and he started up with a horrid jerk, the voice of that clairvoyant woman. The sentence died away into the darkness, but one word remained: water. At first he wondered, but at once explanation came. Cause and effect were obvious. The clue was physical. His body needed water, and so the thought came up into his mind. He was thirsty. This was the moment when fear first really touched him. Hunger was manageable, more or less, for a day or two, certainly, but thirst and the desert were an evil pair that, by cumulative suggestion gathering since childhood days, brought terror in. Once in the mind, it could not be dislodged. In spite of his best efforts, the ghastly thing grew passionately, because his thirst grew too. He had smoked much, had eaten spiced things at lunch, had breathed in alkali with the dry, scorched air. He searched for a cool flint pebble to put into his burning mouth, but found only angular scraps of dusty limestone. There were no pebbles here. The cold helped a little to counteract, but already he knew in himself subconsciously the dread of something that was coming. What was it? He tried to hide the thought and bury it out of sight. The utter futility of his tiny strength against the power of the universe appalled him, and then he knew. The merciless sun was on the way, already rising. Its return was like the presage of execution to him. It came. With true horror he watched the marvellous swift dawn break over the sandy sea. The eastern sky glowed hurriedly as from crimsoned fires. Ridges, not noticeable in the starlight, turned black in endless series, like flat-topped billows of a frozen ocean. Wide streaks of blue and yellow followed. As the sky dropped sheets of faint light upon the wind-eaten cliffs and showed their undersides. They did not advance, they waited till the sun was up, and then they moved. They rose and sank, they shifted as the sunshine lifted them, and the shadows crept away. But in an hour there would be no shadows any more. There would be no shade. The little groups of stones began to dance. It was horrible. The unbroken, huge expanse lay round him, warming up 12 hours of blazing hell to come. Already the monstrous desert glared, each bit familiar, since each bit was a repetition of the bit before, behind, on either side. It laughed at guidance and direction. He rose and walked. For miles he walked, though how many, north, south, or west, he knew not. The frantic thing was in him now, the fury of the desert. He took its pace, its endless, tireless stride, the stride of the burning, murderous desert that is waterless. He felt it alive, a blinding, heaving desire in it to reduce him to its conditionless, awful dryness. He felt, yet knowing this was feverish and not to be believed, that his own small life lay on its mighty surface, a mere dot in space, a mere heap of little stones. His emotions, his fears, his hopes, his ambitions, his love, mere bundled group of little unimportant stones that danced with apparent activity for a moment, then were merged in the undifferentiated surface underneath. He was included in a purpose greater than his own. The will made a plucky effort then. "A night and a day," he laughed, while his lips cracked smartingly with the stretching of the skin. "What is it? Many a chap has lasted days and days." Yes, only he was not of that rare company. He was ordinary, unaccustomed to privation, weak, untrained of spirit, unacquainted with stern resistance. He knew not how to spare himself. The desert struck him where it pleased, all over. It played with him. His tongue was swollen. The parched throat would not swallow. He sank. An hour he lay there, just wit enough in him to choose the top of a mound where he could be most easily seen. He lay 2 hours, 3, 4 hours. The heat blazed down upon him like a furnace. The sky, when he opened his eyes once, was empty. Then a speck became visible in the blue expanse, and presently another speck. They came from nowhere. They hovered very high, almost out of sight. They appeared, they disappeared, they reappeared. Nearer and nearer they swung down in sweeping, stealthy circles, little dancing groups of them, miles away but ever drawing closer, the vultures. He had strained his ears so long for sounds of feet and voices that it seems he could no longer hear at all. Hearing had ceased within him. Then came the water dreams with their agonizing torture. He heard that, heard it running in silvery streams and rivulets across green English meadows. It rippled with silvery music. He heard it splash. He dipped hands and feet and head in it, in deep, clear pools of generous depth. He drank. With his skin he drank, not with mouth and throat alone. Ice clinked in effervescent, sparkling water against a glass. He swam and plunged. Water gushed freely over back and shoulders, gallons and gallons of it, bathfuls and to spare, a flood of gushing, crystal, cool, life-giving liquid. And then he stood in a beech wood and felt the streaming deluge of delicious summer rain upon his face, heard it drip luxuriantly upon a million thirsty leaves. The wet trunks shone, the damp moss spread its perfume, ferns waved heavily in the moist atmosphere. He was soaked to the skin in it. A mountain torrent, fresh from fields of snow, foamed boiling past, and the spray fell in a shower upon his cheeks and hair. He dived, head foremost. Ah, he was up to the neck, and she was with him. They were under water together. He saw her eyes gleaming into his own beneath the copious flood. The voice, however, was not hers. "You will drown, yet you will not know you drown." His swollen tongue called out a name, but no sound was audible. He closed his eyes. There came sweet unconsciousness. A sound in that instant was audible, though. It was a voice, voices, and the thud of animal hoofs upon the sand. The specks had vanished from the sky as mysteriously as they came. And as though in answer to the sound, he made a movement, an automatic, unconscious movement. He did not know he moved, and the body, uncontrolled, lost its precarious balance. He rolled, but he did not know he rolled. Slowly, over the edge of the sloping mound of sand, he turned sideways. Like a log of wood, he slid gradually, turning over and over, nothing to stop him, to the bottom. A few feet only, and not even steep, just steep enough to keep rolling slowly. There was a splash, but he did not know there was a splash. They found him in a pool of water. One of these rare pools the desert Bedouins mark preciously for their own. He had lain within 3 yards of it for hours. He was drowned, but he did not know he drowned. End of Story 10.